Hey, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I want to finish up China, but something I've never been able. I want to talk about fentanyl. I never got the answer on where this shit comes from, and I realized that maybe you know.
Yeah.
I thought it was at first it was cartels fucking with other cartels and their stash, but then there was like, how would anybody know? I heard it was cutting, but I'm like, why would you cut with like a death drug? And then also there's this weird thing of like a cop had 1 grain on his shoulder, had to go to the hospital, and other guys are fully snorting straight lines of fentanyl. It's like these stories don't match. Like something's off in this, and they go with their tolerance. Like, how do you go from 1 grain will kill you? How do you get your tolerance that much from 1 grain will kill you to snorting full lines? There's no A meets X meets Y on that.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean that's
What is it?
just okay. Well, a few questions there. The tolerance one is that opioids really do produce a remarkable tolerance in habitual users. It is genuinely the case that someone who's been using opioids for years and has a high tolerance can use a quantity of fentanyl that would be deadly many times over for a non-tolerant user.
Okay.
And with fentanyl in particular, it's weird. People always talk about the potency of fentanyl, but they don't talk about the duration of it. It's a very short duration drug. That's why in terms of the medical preparations, they're always like a transdermal patch that allows continuous release into the bloodstream, or a lollipop that you keep in your mouth so that it's continuously being released. If you just snort,
A fent?
yeah,
Fentanyl lollipops?
yeah, the brand name Actique,
Brand name.
yeah,
What?
yeah.
Where do you get that?
It's used for breakthrough cancer pain. It's not.
Oh, right.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, fentanyl is a very important medicine. It has a terrible name, but it's kind of a extremely useful way of managing pain in cancer, and
Yeah.
it's used in
Oh, okay.
anesthesia as well.
Where's it coming from?
So this was a sort of inevitability because with heroin, in order to make it, you need poppies. You don't need poppies, but it
Like you said, they want to start with as much base product as
yeah,
possible.
yeah. So it's just a one-step chemical reaction from the morphine in poppies to heroin. It's a very easy transformation. It doesn't even really need to be done, but the diacetylation makes it stronger. And this means that it has to be produced in a region of the world that has these poppies. There's all kinds of complexity introduced, although it does make the chemistry aspect easier. And this really has been going on for a long time. Really picked up during World War II. There was a huge initiative, particularly in Germany, to find synthetic opioids that weren't dependent on any kind of natural product in order to produce. And that's where you get methadone and Demerol and a lot of these synthetic opioids that aren't being made that way. And then that kind of opened the door that it doesn't need to have a chemical similarity to morphine in order to exert the same type of effect. You can have completely synthetic compounds that are far stronger than morphine or heroin that are easier to produce because of just being fully synthetic products. And out of that, I mean, opioids are such valuable medicines and have been for such a long time that there has been a huge amount of scientific research dedicated to exploring the different types of structures that exert that kind of activity. And of course, there's been this eternal search for an opioid that doesn't produce addiction, which hasn't gone all that well. And so in the context of this, there was a medicinal chemist named Paul Janssen. He was the one that discovered fentanyl. And it was a really amazing discovery because this is a chemically somewhat simple substance that is way, way stronger than morphine or heroin or anything like that, and can be produced easily and has great medical properties. But those same features that made it attractive from a medical perspective also made it attractive from a recreational perspective. And it was an inevitability that someone would start making this in underground labs. It's just too easy to make and too potent, and the profit margin is so enormous that there's no way to prevent it.
Okay. Sure. And then how does it go from? How is it in everybody's coke?
Well, that's the other. There's so many.
And also, how is it not in anybody's coke in Berlin and in London? And in
Yeah,
Spain?
I'm not sure how much cocaine actually contained. I've heard these reports.
Coke, Molly, all of it. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like it's in our powder and pressed powder, and it's not in anyone in Europe's.
One possibility is cross-contamination. If someone who's selling drugs is dealing with fentanyl, some fentanyl could get into the other drugs that they're selling. It's one possibility. The other more nefarious possibility is that they're intentionally introducing it to make these other drugs more addictive, because if you have cocaine that also contains fentanyl, then it will be more addictive. People will buy more of
addictive.
it.
So it wasn't to cut it, because also like it kind of does the opposite of Coke, right?
Yeah.
So like it would be like then none of it makes sense to me.
Yeah. I'm not sure how frequently that happens. I think it does happen occasionally, but the other thing is that when a drug gains a status as like the evil danger drug, then people start blaming it for problems without evidence.
Right.
So, I've often spoken with people and they say, oh, someone I know died of a fentanyl overdose. And I say, like, that's terrible. How do you know? And they'll say, oh, well, they were using opioids and they died. And
So we used to just have ODs.
yeah, people.
20 years ago,
yeah,
you
people
just like because you partied too hard.
Yeah, people can and do overdose on heroin or morphine or whatever.
Yeah.
It's very much possible to overdose on most opioids of that nature, and
It's when everyone at a party dies. That's when it's like, oh, hold up.
Yeah. This is not to say that people don't die from fentanyl. They absolutely
Yeah.
do. But it has attained the status as the drug that causes death. So people without evidence will attribute any drug overdose to fentanyl. And in doing so, enhance the reputation of this drug without real evidence for it playing any causal role in the death. So, and that, of course, is not to say that it's all nocebo or that nobody experiences these side effects. It's just that there are these complicated effects of expectation. And with these cops, they're hearing nothing but the worst of the worst. They have this whole internal mythology surrounding drugs, things like PCP. They distribute manuals that only serve to heighten the fears associated with it. And I think this is like, and then this trickles out into the culture. The cops speak to journalists. The journalists uncritically repeat what the cops have told them. People uncritically read what the journalists have repeated from the cops. And suddenly you think that people consuming PCP have superhuman strength.
Yep, that was always the thing.
Yeah.
That's what they told us when we were in like grade school. You'd jump out of a like a third story building and be fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or Rodney King was on PCP, so they had to beat him up because
superhuman strength.
Yeah.
And it becomes a justification for police brutality, because if you are promoting an idea that a drug gives people superhuman strength, then some very serious force is warranted. These are people that can tear open handcuffs and tear car doors off their hinges. So you really have to be very careful.
And if you're a cop who's read that, if he's not using it evilly, but like, I'm scared. This guy's just took a superpower pill.
Yeah, but of course the issue is that it's not true.
Right.
So then it's in whether or not the cops truly believe it. I think in many instances they do.
Yeah.
Because that is part of the culture of kind of vigilance and fear that is so prominent in law enforcement. And so with fentanyl, it's like it is a very potent drug, and it is somewhat frightening. And if you don't know that much about pharmacology or toxicology, and you just hear the stuff is so many thousand times more potent than morphine, and then you see a bag of some white powder and you start to feel a little weird, it's very easy to freak yourself out and think that you're dying. And then if that happens, then you're kind of heroic as well, because you just, in the line of duty, you just were poisoned trying to keep America's youth safe. It's a good story.
Right.
It promotes caution. So there's a lot of incentive to promote ideas like that, even if they're not true.
Right. This is why every time, like, you fuck some skank, you're like, the next day, you're like, that itch is something. That can't just be because I didn't shower this morning. That's got to be some disease.
Yeah,
and then
just
for
that.
like 3-4 full weeks, you're like, well, I have everything. But why is it in all of our stuff suddenly? It wasn't around like 6 years ago.
Well, again, these have to do with complicated market factors. So there was this change in medical attitudes toward opioids that is largely attributed to the effects of Purdue and the Sacklers, where, and I actually think that they're endlessly attacked by journalists and really everyone, but I think that there is a case to be made for liberal prescription of opioids. I'm not so into the idea of being prevented from accessing drugs that I want to use. I don't like the idea that I'm not going to be allowed to consume drugs for my own safety in general. So on that level, I'm a little bit hesitant to wag my finger at somebody for allowing me to access drugs. Of course, it's more complicated than that.
Yeah, I would just like if I'm getting even like a Vicodin for a tooth, like a tooth surgery or something, there's still a warning, like, hey, don't drive on this. Like, you might get super tired.
Right.
A bit of a warning with whatever that Purdue drug was that they're making movies about.
OxyContin.
Yeah. A bit of a warning instead of suggesting it to my friend and my dad and all these people, like, take that. I'm like, dude, no. Take aspirin first and then Vicodin and then get on that shit.
Yeah. Yeah, it was overprescribed without question. But one unintended consequence of this was that journalists loved the story. This was like an addictive drug for the journalists, was shaming the Sackler family, because it's a perfect story.
They're rich also.
They're rich, totally unsympathetic, totally without risk to criticize them, and you look good doing it. You're standing up against the people who died, against these evil billionaires. So everyone kept drumming the story, and the New York Times would write these things where they say internal documents from Purdue show that they were aware that oxycodone was an addictive drug. And it's like, well, of course they were. Are you kidding me? Like, how is this even remotely surprising? So I thought the way that it was being covered was kind of nuts. So Purdue's under all this pressure. They reformulate oxycodone in an abuse deterrent tablet that can't be crushed or injected. So suddenly all these people that are dependent on crushing and injecting or snorting oxycodone can't really do it anymore, and they shift to other sources of opioids in order to achieve the high, and this creates a market for fentanyl. Purdue is still blamed for it, but it's a little weird to say it's still your fault for making the oxycodone less abusable. And
right, because the people who are already on it were like, well, now we're going to search for something, but they're, I guess, less addicting. They're getting less new patients or customers.
And then there's a major crackdown on opioids. There's all of these lawsuits, and then people still want opioids. By 2021, the media was fully saturated with stories about Purdue and the Sacklers and OxyContin and the opioid epidemic. There probably wasn't a person alive who hadn't encountered those stories, and yet more people died of drug overdoses than any other year in history. And so the idea that it's as simple as this is what happens when you liberally allow people to access drugs doesn't really capture the reality that there are all these social factors like COVID and kind of
like I'm bored as fuck.
Isolation.
We're doing drugs.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I'm alone, social isolation, disintegration, lack of community.
Was never the most amount of Molly use in business meetings. Because it's like 3 p.m. meeting. I'm so bored until then. I'm like, well, I'll take it at 2:30. It won't kick in until after the meeting. And then push them back at 30 minutes, and then you're fucked. Interesting.
Yeah. And then what happened is, in the wake of that, manufacturers of other potentially abusable drugs, particularly stimulants, decided, all right, well, we don't want to get sued. We don't want the same scrutiny. We just will not make them as available. Of course, there's also pressure from the DEA. And now the result is that Adderall and Ritalin are totally unavailable. Like,
really?
They're for years, they have been completely, they're so unavailable that there are companies in the Philippines that will call pharmacies trying to find one that has any available, because it's like a full-time job. I know a pharmacist who said that people break down crying because they're spending all of their time just trying to find one pharmacy that has Ritalin for their children.
What? Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, when they say overprescribe, it's like that's like it like what is it? Connotatively means it's all bad.
And it also means take away our freedom. We can't.
Right.
We are not allowed. We shouldn't
But
be allowed to have
overprescribed
freedom.
is also like, but sometimes it's good, right? It's just like if it goes too far, it's like sure, but like, you know.
And like, you know, these things are complicated. I don't want to put it all into the ballpark of personal responsibility, but that's a big part of it that never gets acknowledged. No one ever says like, well, you know, you do play a role in
Chill,
decisions.
you've been drinking too much. Stop drinking this week.
Yeah.
Like you're a grown up. Fucking get in control.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're saying they're all pussies. I get it.
Where you been and where you going? This is Ari's travel show, yeah. We're gonna go on a journey today and see what there's to see in this big world. We're exploring different places, seeing all different types of faces. We're gonna talk about travel today. It's you,